Going to move on. Let's talk now about, we're going to welcome Dr. Carrie Samsel, and we're going to discuss domestic violence and its impacts in the workplace. She'll share some advice about what workplaces can do to protect the victim and other workers. So Dr. Carrie Samsel is an emergency physician and medical director of the Sexual Assault and Partner Abuse Care program at the Ottawa Hospital and an assistant professor at the University of Ottawa. She's been active in the fields of forensic medicine and medical education, and with multiple international conference presentations, publications, and committee work. She's been honored with a number of national awards in recognition of her commitment to education and awareness. She's founded a technology consultancy company to assist organizations in policy development, staff training, investigation, and prevention of sexual harassment and assault. We've been trying to get you on our Mayday for a bit, Dr. Samsel, so over to you. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, and I'm glad that I was able to make it. And it's a great honor to speak to this audience of people who are very involved in workplaces and such. I don't have any financial disclosures to disclose, but I do have my viewer discretion slide, which basically means this presentation discusses material that is sensitive in nature and can be disturbing for some people. If it's too much, please feel free to turn away, log out, log back in, and I'm available to talk after the webinar or at another time if you need as well. My contact information will be on there. So, the iceberg of domestic violence. Best estimates say that 1 in 10 people will disclose this to someone. So, and that someone can be a healthcare provider, it can be someone at work, it can be their union representative, it can be a confided friend in their workplace. But the actual epidemiology of this in Canada is that 1 in 3 women will suffer some sort of violence, including sexual assault or domestic violence, in their lifetime. And this is a very big deal. This is more common than hypertension. This is more common than strokes. This is more common than cancer. This is more common than back injuries. But it's not given the same kind of attention that all of those entities have. And it doesn't have the same kind of anti-stigma public awareness campaigns that a lot of other things such as substance use and mental health have really started to develop over time. Instead, you have people like me that are yakking about this to anybody who will listen, basically. There are significant costs to the system as well, and I know that people were talking about costs and WSIB and return to work in the questions for our last speakers. And the costs associated with healthcare alone, so just the medical costs, as well as lost productivity and wages annually in Canada with respect to intimate partner violence equals $7.6 billion, and that's billion with a B, which is equivalent to the GDP of Bermuda, if you need to kind of put in a relativity context. And this is just for the survivor themselves. This isn't the ripple effect that Dr. Scharf and McMahon discussed before of the community of people around the survivor of violence. So that almost $8 billion lost every year is just for the survivor themselves. You can see a number of news articles that are listed here. These are all over the last 2 years, basically. And there is a place called the Canadian Femicide Observatory for Justice and Accountability, which keeps track of murders of women in particular in Canada. And there's 149 women or girls have been murdered in the early part of this year. And only 25% of them in media reports have been attributed to a male partner. Oh shoot, this is moving on its own. There we go. And the way that it's discussed in the media, it doesn't always make it obvious that this was a domestic violence type of thing. And so these interviews, I urge you to, when you see this kind of information that's being portrayed, is to think about some of the root causes like we were speaking about before as well. And probably one of the most disturbing statistics there is that there's a woman that's murdered in Canada every 36 hours. And this is usually by a current or ex-partner. And this is up from every 6 days that had been in 2021. So 2022 has been a particularly lethal year. And this keeps jumping forward for me, and that's very annoying. Okay. So what does intimate partner violence look like? We think of it like this. So we see people with bruises and fractures and lacerations and head injuries for people who are working in the healthcare fields. We think of physical harm that is being done to people. We see this portrayed in movies and TV and various other places. But that's not what you're going to see at work, generally speaking. That's not the presentation for the survivor that you're going to see. And us being human beings, we even have a particular idea of what a survivor of violence looks like in our minds, like a particular gender, a particular age, a particular racial background, a particular socioeconomic background. But intimate partner violence is all about power. It's all about a power differential. And so we all have biases as to who we think are victims of violence. But I can tell you with my 15 years here in Ottawa and 5 years previously in Kingston, that this kind of violence spans all genders, all sexual orientations, all ages, all socioeconomic classes, and all ethnic or racial backgrounds. The dynamics of intimate partner violence victimization is people who have less power than those that are victimizing them. So they may be dependent upon them physically. So IPV rates are 10 times that of the general population for people who have physical or cognitive disabilities. And that can be something that they were born with or acquired over later in life. If they're financially dependent on someone, and we talked about some of the financial stressors that people who are off work or are injured at work may have. Cultural or religious dependencies. There's also familial dependencies, like what do you do with your children? It may be very difficult for you to manage that. People stay in difficult relationships because they have pets and they don't know how to manage their pet if they were going to leave at that point, as well as dependent family members. So if you have somebody who's maybe a recent newcomer to Canada and is dependent on someone to maintain that status, that can make them very vulnerable to violence. Emotional dependence is also something that we don't necessarily think of in the same way. And this is something that can be hard for people to wrap their heads around because they will see something in the news, say, where someone who has been a high profile person who has been a survivor of violence, and you're like, well, they have everything going for them. I don't understand how they ended up in this. They're so successful. They're so strong. They're so outgoing. They're so whatever descriptive you want to have. And it's because their sense of self-worth is altered. So while they've been in this relationship, they've been told that they are worthless. They are being isolated from friends or family or coworkers. They have electronic isolation, which is a very big deal over the COVID pandemic in particular, just because this is how we are interacting with people generally. And so it alters what they think of themselves. So what we think of on the outside isn't necessarily what they feel on the inside. And it's really important for things like work from home during the COVID pandemic, because while sheltering in place or working from home is a great thing from an infectious point of view, it may be the most dangerous place for a person. So it's something that we really do need to keep in mind and take into consideration when we're thinking of people's workplaces as they are not the traditional workspaces that we're used to. So what does this look like? What are you going to see as somebody who works in a workplace type of environment? So if you see somebody who is wearing clothing that's incongruent for the temperature or what they're usually wearing, particularly things like long sleeves and big turtlenecks and things like that, and it's 40 degrees outside, they might be trying to cover up something under the circumstance. And so that might be a red flag for you to think about. If they're wearing more makeup than usual, if they are somebody who people get very good at makeup to try to cover bruises, to cover abrasions, to cover other signs of abuse. And so if somebody is more of a natural look kind of person and suddenly shows up wearing lots of makeup, that also might be something that you may want to see as a red flag. Another big thing is absenteeism, lateness, missing workplace deadlines. Maybe they're not attending social events. We don't really have a lot of true social events at this time, but sometimes people have, workplace virtual coffee breaks or little check-ins and chats and stuff like that. And they're just not participating or engaged in their workplace the same way that they used to be. And if when they are engaged, they seem withdrawn, that's also something, or something that's very different from their baseline personality. That's something that is worth thinking about with respect to their overall violence perspective. The other thing is that if you're working from home and their cameras are off all the time, that's also can be something that, maybe it's not just a bandwidth issue. Maybe it's something that they're trying to be a little bit less obvious and trying to be a little bit more undercover for. And for those that are working in a physical office or in a physical space, is that they get quite overwhelmed by usual workplace stimuli. So phones ringing, that ding for the email alert. If you work in a place that has elevator doors that open or close, doors opening, any of those signs of hypervigilance can be something that is a red flag that someone's experiencing violence at their home and that they're having a hard time coping. So what are you going to do? You may have, be running through your mind right now and think, oh, shoot, I think of somebody that may meet this. What do I do? How do I ask? What do I say? Is it my business? I don't know. And um, yes, it is your business, and I'll tell you how to ask. But the big thing is to have an actual plan around this. It's not enough to be a caring and considerate human being. The workplace itself needs to have a full fulminant plan that you need to put into place to take care of this person and to help them thrive within their workplace. And these are kind of the main components that this plan needs to have. It has to be practical. If it's something that is going to take 50,000 steps and require all kinds of things to happen that the stars have to align for, no one's ever going to do it. It has to work for your workplace. And as people were talking particularly about, um, you know, the black box of a particular workplace, it needs to work for your setting. There isn't a one size fits all type thing. It has to be easy to implement. So you have to be able to train the right people to be able to be on the lookout for this. If you have union representation, if you have workplace wellness people, if you have occupational health people, all of these kind of people are kind of your key players to involve in this. And you need to keep everyone safe. So the person who is being victimized, the person who asked the questions and was brave enough to actually go there and, risk themselves for this, because perhaps they're being harassed or the violence is happening within the workplace itself. And so you need to be able to keep someone safe within there. And those are the protections for all. So the protections are physical as well as psychological safety for everybody who's involved in this process. There are laws around this, of course, and there were some recent changes to that I will talk a little bit about in just a second. And the nice thing is that, you could take these concepts and plans and everything and then adapt them to your situation. You don't have to use something that someone else has done and try to, put that square peg in the round hole. There are ways to adapt all of these things. And I do help people work that out for their individual workplaces if they feel very lost. So the two questions you can ask people are, do you feel safe at home? Has someone hurt you? That's it. There's lots and lots of screening tools that people use in centers that are specialty care centers for intimate partner violence. They're very long, they're very cumbersome. It feels like you're filling out a tax form. So those two questions are quick, they're easy, they're accessible. And they don't have abuse in them specifically because not everybody identifies themselves as being abused. They may think of themselves as, well, this is how relationships work out, or I provoke them, so therefore this, that, and the other. So it's very accessible. It will pick up who you need to pick up, and it helps you try to implement the further stages of the plan that's going on. How do you keep people safe within the workplace? So you need to come up with, first of all, a need to know list. So who needs to know that this person is experiencing violence in their life? You don't want this broadcast like company wide, but you do need to have key players knowing what's going on. So if you have security at your workplace, they need to know what's happening. If there's a direct manager, if you have occupational health and wellness, if there's other people within that, these are people that can be on your need to know list. And this need to know list is done in conjunction with the violent survivor, because the worst thing for someone who feels like they've lost control of their life and has that power differential is for somebody to impose something in a power differential kind of way, saying, well, we're going to tell XYZ person, because it takes away a lot of their agency in and of itself. You may want to have pictures of the assailant available to people like security if you have a very open access kind of workplace. Knowing who to be on the look for is a good thing. COVID has actually, one of the small benefits is that workplaces don't have as many visitors at them, and that keeps people safer. So I work in a hospital primarily. Hospitals previously, everybody could wander in and out all over the place. And with COVID, that's less of a thing at this point. So it's a little bit easier to keep people safe in this circumstances. They may need to change their workplace phone number or email addresses because a lot of people get cyber spamming where people are phoning them incessantly, emailing them incessantly, talking, trying to, keep control or tabs or watch on somebody at all times. So that may be working from there. And then the other piece is that if you have somebody who is going to be managing the visitors or calls or anything like that, so if you have a receptionist, if you have somebody down in a lobby of a building, a greeter, anything like that, having scripts specifically for what people will say when people try to access this person is a good thing, because you can imagine if somebody shows up and suddenly they're not allowed into a workplace area, and the poor person at the front door is like, well, you just can't come here. I can't tell you why. Go away. Like, that's very uncomfortable for them. And so you need to have something that they can use that's a script. Same thing over the phone. Everybody's had that awkward phone call where you're like, don't know what to say. We want to try to avoid that as much as possible here. And it's human nature, and people are often reluctant to interfere in something that they consider to be private. And there's still a lot of stigma around intimate partner violence. People feel quite a lot of shame around this. So it can be difficult on both sides of the equation. But if you work together in a collaborative, psychologically safe kind of way, it is a way to keep everyone safe and keep that person in that workplace for longer. And there's some very stark examples of when this isn't being held. So I'm an emergency physician, as I was introduced. This is a fellow emergency physician who was coming into her workplace and was actually murdered in the waiting room of her emergency department by her ex-partner. So things can go horribly, horribly wrong when these plans aren't put into place. And there are lots of examples within Canada as well that this happens. So this isn't only a United States thing. For people who do virtual meetings, everybody does virtual meetings. If you're doing meetings these days, for the most part, you may have seen this image floating around on social media. This is a virtual safety screen, and you can have this as a wait screen for people waiting to come into meetings, people, on hold, all that kind of stuff. And you can greet people in their meetings by doing kind of the Girl Scout salute that's shown in picture number 1 there. You say, hello, everybody. It's so nice to have you join us here for the meeting today, and hold your hand up like this and look to see how people respond to that. So that can give you a sense of what you can't see going on behind you, behind the camera, behind the blurred or fun background that you have for people. So one of the other points that's really important with this, and it was touched on in the previous presentation as well, is that once you have a disclosure of intimate partner violence, you can't just treat that as an isolated event and be like, okay, I'm done here. Thank you very much. You are a vital safety link for this employee, and you're a trusted person for this employee. So you do need to keep in touch with them. And so whether that's via a predefined safe email or text message or phone call, or maybe this is the employee that comes back into the office. Hard to say. It's going to be something that's individual, depending on the situation. But that's just to reevaluate to see if their safety needs are being met, and if there's any other thing that you need to employ under the circumstances to keep them safe and keep them employed within your center. So what about the mandatory reporting stuff? Because that, it's very aspirational, like we were saying, that people do all the right thing all the time. It's very difficult to do this. There's lots of competing interests. This makes it mandatory. So there is a legal obligation under the Canada Labor Code, which is the Part 2 revised code, to prevent and protect against harassment and violence in the workplace, to respond to occurrences of harassment and violence in the workplace, and to offer support to employees affected by harassment and violence in their workplace. And that's directly out of the Canada Labor Act. And it's important to note at this point that an employee's workplace is no longer limited to your traditional on-site building and facilities or things that we think of as workplace properties. And this law specifically states that an employee's workplace follows them wherever they're performing work. So this includes their home if they're working from home. And so what do you do? How does this reporting work? So the reporting is actually to the Labor Relations Board within the Ministry of Labor. This is not to the police specifically. This is purely an occupational and labor side of things. And you cannot make a report to police on behalf of a survivor of violence unless they wish you to do so. There is privacy law around that. And for those that work in healthcare specifically, we are mandated by confidentiality around that as well. Okay, so that is the mandatory workplace reporting piece. Now, there's a small asterisk here with child protection or children's aid. So if someone has children within the home where the violence is being occurring, that is a mandatory call to the Children's Aid Society. And Children's Aid has lots of experience with it. We work with them all the time to try to have a sensitive assessment of what the home is like. They're not going to barge in and try to apprehend the children and make this so much worse for everybody else. But there is a mandatory reporting for that small piece of things. You just can't report to police on behalf of the survivor themselves. So how do you write this down? All workplaces come with documentation. This happens to be what old-fashioned medical documentation looks like in the picture. So you want to document things to keep yourself and your coworker safe. And what you're going to document is what was told to you directly. So what they said about their safety, who the involved parties are, so who is on that need to know list, and the time of date of disclosure, so who you told when, basically. What you did for the mandatory duties completed. So sending things to Ministry of Labor, sending stuff to Children's Aid if need be, time and date that you did that on, and any response that you received back from that. What kind of supports you discussed with that employee. So all the options that you ran through for them to help keep themselves safe and for you to keep them safe, and what they chose to do. So what was put in place to keep them safe. You also want to write down, if you can, anything the employee declined to have done at this time, because it's important to know so you're not kind of bugging them with the same stuff over and over again. Ah, crap, this is doing that again. And you want to try to do this documentation as contemporaneously as possible, just because it's really hard to keep it all fresh in your mind and times and dates and all that kind of stuff. And you're going to add addenda as need be for if you hear back from, say, Ministry of Labor or something like that. And one thing I'll recommend is that if you have a template on how to do this that's kind of optimized for your workplace, it takes a lot of the guesswork out of what should be included and how you can document things, and it makes it a lot less stressful for people. This is what we're trying to prevent in people, and this is what we're trying to manage as well. So this is intimate partner violence is at the center of that Venn diagram, and there's a huge overlap that happens with mental health, both before the assault and after. Same with substance use before and after assaults. And this all affects things like workplace performance, their productivity, and can even lead to school and job interruptions. So people will drop out of the workforce for whatever time frame to try to manage this. And some people don't come back. So we want to try to put good supports in place so that we can minimize these Venn diagrams and have someone have IPV as a feature of themselves, but not necessarily their underpinning. I want to take a quick second to talk about vicarious trauma and self-care. So this is a heart sink difficult situation to manage. This is not your happy fun, let's gossip about what happened on, a fun reality TV show kind of conversation. And they bring up a lot of complex emotions within people. We want to help people, but we don't know what to do. We don't want to offend people. You may know the person that's the assailant, and that makes it even more tricky. You may not have social infrastructure access as easily that these people need, and sometimes you feel a sense of injustice for them, or maybe it's something that's even more personal to you. And so you need to acknowledge these feelings. A lot of us try to kind of soldier on as best as we can, and it's really hard, and it will fester and grow, and it will be not a good thing. So whatever you use for difficult situation coping skills is something that you want to deploy here. So the first step is to acknowledge that this is very difficult. And then the second thing is to use those difficult situation coping skills. So whether that's talking with someone that you trust that was in a confidential type of way, some people find exercises therapeutic for them. Some people like journaling, meditation, and then there's professional counseling, your employee access program for professional help for people around this as well is also can be vital for people who feel like this is adversely affecting their wellness. Here's a couple of great resources for how to find IPV treatment centers and experts and information. So the top one, that's the rainbow one, is my program here in Ottawa, and it outlines all the clinical services and has some information around IPV and workplace type issues on our website. And then the purple one on the bottom here is our whole Ontario network. So we have a network of 38 treatment centers across the province, and every hospital in Ontario is affiliated and has a memorandum of understanding with a specialized treatment program. So for those of you who work in healthcare, there is someone that can help you out here. And if you don't work in healthcare, if you take a look on the bottom there, it says resources. There's all kinds of great information to get further things. And patients and you can use this as well. So you can see the nice yellow get help button. It'll give you information for how to access services to help a person get the help that they need. And it has the nice browser and cache clearing, hide my tracks and leave page things as well. So if somebody is in a situation where this may be a little bit scary from there. So IPV is really common, and it's probably affected your workplace, whether you've been aware of it or not. And it's more common than a lot of other stuff that we look for and are concerned for. So hopefully with some of the tools and techniques that I talked with you here today, you can help literally save somebody's life, but also make their workplace and their workplace well-being much, much better by being aware, asking questions, and getting the help that they need. And the information is this is really an overview. Like I can talk endlessly about this kind of stuff. And I'm available at the contact information that's there. If you want more specific information about this topic in general or a more design plan for your individual workplace, the bottom thing there is Twitter. I am on that. It's not a total sewer all the time. So I am happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Carrie. I think, yes, we do have a few minutes for questions, although I did hear you say you would stay around a little bit after 12. So maybe we'll do a couple of questions now, and then we'll get to the next speaker to give them time. But then also, would you said you could stay a little bit if somebody has one after?
Absolutely. I'm happy to stick around as long as I can here. And if people are shy or don't want to talk about stuff, email me. I am a happy emailer, so feel free to send me emails outside of the time as well.
Cool. Okay. I didn't see one in the chat. I'm going to look at the participants list. Anybody have a question or a comment for Carrie?
Terry, I could ask a question. I guess I wondered about that Make It Our Business program. Have you been involved with it at all? That's targeted at places?
Yes, absolutely. So they're great. They do some great advocacy work and some design and making people kind of understand the ins and outs of IPV and the legislation around that. I've been very peripherally involved with them, but they're doing a lot of really great work. So they are another great resource from that side of things as well.
Yeah, I haven't been involved for several years, but we did bring in like the local trainers who know what resources are in the community, so can dialogue about the issues, about how to offer assistance and support, and then also what community contacts might be of benefit to people. So I thought that was a really good program to be regionally based, because
each individual community is slightly different because it depends where you are. So if you're in a very urban downtown Toronto location, it's going to look different than if you're up north in a more remote location and things like that. And so the healthcare centers that I have listed for the Ontario one is also, they help connect with a lot of the community resources, and a lot of people are reluctant to ask the question because they really don't know what to do with it afterwards. And so all of these resources can help kind of make you feel a little bit more empowered to be able to help with that kind of thing.
I have one more question, then I'll turn it over to back to Terry. It was around, I don't know that I caught, although I had to take a call too. Was there, did you talk about in the Ontario legislation, there's an obligation to inform others if the domestic violence risk could come into the workplace? And that's
Yes.
always challenging to balance the confidentiality and support for
Absolutely.
the victim with the other obligation to inform. And I just wondered if you have any resources or flowchart or anything to
Absolutely.
help workplaces.
So that's really tricky, just as you can imagine, because you want, this is not something that somebody wants trumpeted out front of their workplace necessarily, but if it's something that's going to cross over into the workplace, then you need to keep everyone safe there at the same time. And so that's why I think the broad concept that I put in of the need to know list, specifically, because if you craft that, if you have a framework and then you craft that with the survivor, then they know what's happening and they know who's on that need to know list. And so that satisfies both the legal requirement, but also helps find that balance between privacy and safety disclosure that's happening as well. So yeah, it can be, it's definitely a delicate balancing act. And to me, I think applying that overarching principle within your own center meets both that legal requirement and is flexible enough for the various differences that happen in different workplaces.
There's a couple of questions in the chat I'm going to combine and get you to answer this one, and then if other people have more, we can ask them at 12. So have you found workplaces that have been sympathetic to offering these kinds of supports? And can you please repeat how to sensitively ask someone if you suspect they're being abused? Those questions.
Absolutely. So the two questions are, do you feel safe at home? Has someone hurt you? So those are the two questions that I use, and we screen with them at hospitals and that kind of stuff as well. And workplaces usually are sympathetic to this. Because the management of it, like people who are survivors of intimate partner violence, a lot of times are a sympathetic figure in general kind of pop culture parlance. And a lot of the management that happens for these patients is not within the workplace itself. So if they can liaise with somebody, it takes the pressure off of them. And so it makes it much easier from that. And everybody gets really sympathetic when it's mandated. So that's the other thing as well. So I'm a big fan of the mandatory reporting portion of it, just because it helps those that maybe are a little less enlightened about the effect that this has be participating in this as well. And I'm sorry,
really
there's a
great.
street sweeper.
I really like how you encourage workplaces to plan in advance before they have a circumstance. And I did hear you say that there might be some templates out there, and I want to encourage anyone that's at our session today, if you have one that you can link to in the chat, that would be wonderful. I know when I worked at OPSU, I had one of sorts that I gleaned from the internet. I don't know where it is now because I retired, but anyway, please share them if anybody has any. And if you want to, Carrie did say she'd stay a bit around 12 if people want to ask a question. And there's an invite to place any other related websites to the conversation in the chat. Let's use our chat.
And if there's something that goes haywire on me, feel free to email me. I am never bugged by emails for this stuff, so feel free to reach out that way as well. And thank you for your time.
Awesome. Thanks for coming.